I'm Ronald James. Welcome to Bigger Questions. For thousands of years, humans have looked up at the cosmos and wondered, why are we here? Now, the trend is to look in the other direction. But there's nothing new about that. We indeed live in interesting times. Here we sit, taking another look at some of the oldest teachings about our existence. We're living in a matrix. An illusion? Yeah, they've been saying that for a long time. Long enough for more brilliant minds to dismiss the entire concept. But now, we're starting to prove it scientifically. How cool is that? What is the true nature of reality? And what is the connection between consciousness and spirit? What kind of a world will we live in when there is a total fusion of science and religion? The Bigger Questions series addresses these most fundamental of questions with the help and guidance of some of the scientific community's most brilliant thinkers. From the realms of quantum physics, parapsychology, psychology, mathematics, astronomy, and spiritual studies, we're asking bigger questions.
Certainly the world unfolds according to law. Modern science is all about discovering nature's deepest laws, laws governing life at every level of the physical universe. Whether that means it's pre-programmed or not, I wouldn't say, in the sense that there's a tremendous amount of freedom built right into the system. In fact, the very emergence of our universe itself was an act of freedom. It was one of probably an infinity of simultaneously existing universes percolating from this unbounded underlying sea of intelligence. This ocean of intelligence called the unified field. That itself is an act of freedom. There's a tremendous richness of possible outcomes and diversity built right into our universe. But yes, it does unfold. Yes, it is governed by law. Quantum mechanics tells us that our universe is profoundly interconnected. Even technologically, we're beginning to learn how to exploit those quantum mechanical interconnections between distant regions of the laboratory or even of the universe. For example, through technologies like quantum teleportation, we are taking advantage of the unseen connection between objects, between things. That really resembles, to some extent, the physics of the hologram. So it is a more holistic and profoundly more connected universe than any Newtonian physicist would have imagined.
I mean, Immanuel Kant did such a wonderful job of talking about the parameters we use to measure what we think of as reality, and we place it outside of ourselves. So this 3 dimensions of distance and 1 dimension of time, they may be just parameters whereby our brain functions in order to eventually project the things outside which we think are outside, but they're within us, but we then don't know quite what we are. We see ourselves in a certain way, or we think we do, but is it truly that way? I don't know. Is it important? Well, perhaps, probably, ultimately, but it's an interesting thing. I would like to add one important factor, I think, and that is the heart. Most of the focus is on the brain. I think we have a lousy system if the brain runs the body. We have a much, much better system if the heart runs the body, and the brain is a cooperating subsystem of the heart. I think we build a much better culture. We have much greater sense of knowing in the universe. We truly begin to see each other as one, etc. When we do it with the brain as the dominant mainframe, and the heart and the others as subsystems, we tend to look at differences more than we look at samenesses. So I would make a vote and a plea that the brain be taken as the subsystem and let the heart be the organ, the mainframe that really guides us in our development. I think we'll go a lot further that way. 20th century physics has brought us to the point of knowing how to do science, taught us requirements, taught us a lot about our cognitive responses to nature's expression in a particular band of reality.
There are many, many, many paradigms, and it's premature to select any one of them, but they provide at least some metaphors for reality. There are at least two domains of reality. One is the one we see, the physical reality, and what I learned in my years of being a physicist is that the four known forces of physics, the weak atomic, the strong nuclear binding force, electromagnetics, and gravity, those four aren't enough to explain reality. And the notion that all of physical reality that we see is created by cause and effect relationships where certain immutable laws of nature are obeyed ever since the time of the Big Bang, and that everything is materialistic in these three dimensions, is simply not adequate to explain reality. And we know that from a plethora of experiments in quantum physics, parapsychology, biology, and so forth, healing, that it's very clear to me that consciousness and reality has to, we need a new theory to explain consciousness, to bring it into the what now is an extremely culturally biased materialistic worldview.
In classical physics, objects are determined, trajectories can be given. In quantum physics, it is impossible to describe trajectories because of the uncertainty principle. We cannot determine both position and velocity of an object at the same time with utmost accuracy. So then what does quantum physics describe objects as, if not determined objects? What quantum physics gives us is a description in terms of objects being waves of possibility. What that means is that an object has a wave-like characteristic. An object spreads. An object, for example, if you release an electron in space, the electron will not stay put in that place. Instead, electron will have developed possibilities of being in other places all over the room, and then if you give it more time, all over the town, all over the earth, and so forth. So this idea of spreading is described very well as a wave phenomenon. So we say electron is a wave. But then if something very strange takes place, which is that when you try to detect the electron doesn't show up everywhere. In one particular experiment, the electron shows up only in one particular place. But it's not a particle either, because if you did another experiment, the electron would not show up where it showed up before. Newtonian particle would have to show up the same place again, because it's determined. But a quantum object does not show up at the same place, it shows up at a different place. In fact, if you wait long enough and do this experiment repeatedly, put the identical object in the same place, release it, and see where it shows up, eventually you will get a bell curve probability distribution. So that gave us the idea that behind this probability distribution must be a wave of possibility, not an actual wave. So electron waves, or any objects, these quantum wave-like objects, they reside in transcendent potentia, a world that is beyond the space-time three-dimensional reality that you are talking about. We have to postulate it in order to make sense of quantum physics. Quantum mechanics literally cannot be interpreted without assuming that objects are waves in transcendent potential, waves of possibility. And then when we look at them, then the possibility waves collapse, become actual events. Actual events where? Actual events in our experience. In the process of quantum measurement itself, in the process of quantum collapse itself, consciousness, which must be assumed then as the ground of being, becomes separate into a duality, a subject that sees and object that is seen. And this is what happens. That explains everything that happens. Otherwise, you get only piecemeal explanation of this part or that part, but you don't explain the whole thing that is taking place. So, in this way of looking then, consciousness is the ground of being, because otherwise our looking would be a dualistic phenomenon. If we are looking and consciousness is not a possibility, because if consciousness itself obeyed quantum mechanics, looking by consciousness is not going to help. Consciousness got to be non-material and non-quantum. But then, if consciousness looks, how does it look? Question of duality. That is avoided by saying consciousness must be ground of being, and possibilities are possibilities of consciousness. It's looking at its own possibilities. Then there is no duality involved, because it's just recognizing a particular possibility vis-a-vis another possibility, and that is a discontinuous measurement. So we've gotten through that part. And then you can look at other paradoxes, such as, suppose there are two observers and two people to choose. Whose choice counts? Suppose there are contradictory choices. You know, this famous cat paradox. Is the cat alive or dead? Suppose one subject, one observer wants the cat to be dead, one other observer chooses the cat to be alive. Whose choice counts? This paradox can be solved by realizing that we don't choose in our ordinary state of consciousness, in which we seem to have an individuality, we seem to be divided in consciousness. Instead, choice always happens in a non-ordinary state of consciousness where we are one, where there is no two choosers. It's always one chooser. And then you look at the phenomena even further, and then you ask the question, well, when does the measurement actually take place? And that's where you realize that the measurement must take place when there is an observer, there is an observer awareness, there is subject-object split. Otherwise, we could not call it a measurement. So measurement, by definition, must produce a subject-object split. Before measurement, we have what psychologists call unconscious. There is processing, but no awareness, no subject-object split. This is where the quantum possibilities spread. After measurement, we have subject-object split. So measurement itself brings about the subject-object split. This is a little bit too technical to go into, but this is a result of a tangled hierarchical logic that quantum measurement entails in such bodies when a brain is involved or when a living cell is involved. And this tangled hierarchical quantum measurement is what distinguishes life from non-life, or sentient from non-sentient. So it's a very complete theory. The interesting parts is discontinuity, tangled hierarchy, logic breaks down, mechanism breaks down, and because mechanism breaks down, logic breaks down, algorithm cannot be given, we can now invite free will, free choice, freedom of choice of consciousness. And therefore room is made for conscious beings as we know it. We know that ordinarily we are behavioral, ordinarily we don't have free choice, but we know that we do have creative events, we do have moral decisions, where we do have freedom of choice. So in this way of looking, suddenly our science agrees with how we really are, instead of putting us in a straitjacket, fitting us somehow into a behavioral model which is not a complete model of ourselves.
My work, in fact, is to open the box of quantum mechanics and say, hey, you look at the particle movements in direct space-time, and you look at the wave aspects of those in reciprocal space-time. So that now the base space for looking at nature is this H-space. And I also have to invent something which is a coupler between the two, because one goes faster than light, the other goes slower than light. So it becomes, in the very beginning, a 9-dimensional kind of construct that you have to deal with as the very foundation stone for looking at nature. And then if you want to bring humans in, you want to bring in intentionality, which is the way the spirit interacts with the mind domain. Now you have to add one more, so now it's, at the very minimum, you have to talk about a 10-dimensional base space in which to begin to interpret what nature is telling us. That's how I see it, anyway. And it is, all the wave parts deal with wave superposition and constructive interference, destructive interference, and certainly in my model I deal with multiple dimensions beyond our normal four space. And this simulator, of course, it creates the relative universe, and it can create millions and trillions of different kinds of universes. So in terms of it, of there being the possibility of multiple universes as well as multiple dimensions in one universe, sure. I mean, it's the machinery allows that possibility as far as I can tell. I mean, just as we have metal stuff and we have clothing stuff and we have biological stuff, let me give you an example, a metaphor. which I call my bio-bodysuit metaphor. And it is, take the concept that we're all elements of spirit, we're all spirits having a physical experience as we ride the river of life together. And our spiritual parents dressed us in these bio-bodysuits, and they put us in this playpen that we call a universe in order to grow in coherence, in order to develop our gifts of intentionality, in order to become co-creators with our spiritual parents. Now, to me, these bio-bodysuits come in a wide variety of colors and 2 basic forms, which we choose to call genders. And they're made of 4 main layers. The outermost layer is the electric monopole substance layer, which is the majority of what we think of as physical reality. The first inner layer is magnetic monopole substance layer. It's the coarsest level of the vacuum. The next inner layer is the emotion domain substance layer, and the third inner layer is the mind domain substance layer. Those are finer bands in the vacuum, both of them. And inside of that, a portion of our spirit self drives the vehicle. So the vehicle is a sensory instrument and has mobility so that we can experience in this strange earth environment. And it's only a portion of our spirit self that's there because spirit needs infrastructure to attach to. So our job in life is to build infrastructure into these layers of the bio-bodysuit. And as more spirit then comes in and attaches, more of our higher self comes in to drive the vehicle. I call that our day-to-day cellular cohering spirit self. But for me, as spirit enters dense matter, a byproduct is that consciousness appears. So consciousness to me is a concomitant or byproduct of spirit entering dense matter. And we started this process a long time ago by first investing a portion of our spirit self in the bio-bodysuit of a mammalian ape. So you know, it's that evolution versus creation. In this picture, both are there. You had to have a bio-bodysuit to first invest with spirit. And so I see that as we are refining that bio-bodysuit by our consciousness as it grows. But we are left, that bio-bodysuit has memories and it has response aspects associated with the old mammalian ape bio-bodysuits, not yet completely transformed. So a lot of the things that we do, which we are horrified at, is part because that was very natural for the animal aspect we started with.
Quantum interconnectedness is really a very important idea. I could talk about that at some length, because that's the basis of the psychic phenomena that we see in our lives and in the laboratory. The fact that we are connected to each other through space and time. And in the physics laboratory, we find that as you send photons or electrons off into distant directions, even at the speed of light, they remain connected to one another, so that experiments where the photons are created in Zurich, one photon goes off to Basel and the other goes off to Geneva, you can capture one of these photons a dozen kilometers away from its twin, and the twin is still connected. This shows that even across space and time in the laboratory, in a physics experiment, we have this quantum interconnectedness that David Bohm and Henry Stapp and John Bell have been writing about. In fact, Henry Stapp said recently that the discovery of non-locality is probably the most significant discovery in all of science.
We live in a virtual reality. We walk around thinking that we're in direct contact with what is, and in point of fact, our very perception is a kind of thinking. It's just too fast and automatized for us to notice it. And so we're getting a highly edited view of what reality is. So as a psychologist, I'm particularly interested in the fact that we live in a kind of virtual reality, because that virtual reality often doesn't fit into actual reality very well. We have quite distorted views of ourselves, of other people, of the world around us. That's a kind of generalized psychopathology. If you can begin to realize that we do live in a kind of brain-generated virtual reality, then you don't take what you sense quite so absolutely, and it gives you the possibility of catching illusions, of having more freedom in your life?
Quantum mechanics tells us that our universe is profoundly interconnected. Even technologically, we're beginning to learn how to exploit those quantum mechanical interconnections between distant regions of the laboratory or even of the universe. For example, through technologies like quantum teleportation, we are taking advantage of the unseen connection between objects, between things. That really resembles, to some extent, the physics of the hologram. So it is a more holistic and profoundly more connected universe than any Newtonian physicist would have imagined.
The holographic paradigm is one of several ways of explaining this unseen dimension of reality, which seems to be the medium from which physical reality can be created or destroyed. So, for example, in a hologram, the most fundamental information that's unseen is frequency amplitude information. It's basically a laser beam that has a very specific frequency. The hologram then is created by a series of interferences of the beam with itself, so that you get three-dimensional structures in time and space. That we can conceive and we can look at, but it has the unique characteristics that if you try to fragment the hologram, each little piece of it has information about the whole. And so this forces the notion of a holistic science, that this unseen domain that underlies physical reality, it transcends time and space. Form doesn't matter in that domain. It's simply information which you can tap into, which then can become explicate when there is this interaction or dance going on.
Actually, the holographic paradigm is a real good one to illustrate why you need an experiment in there to see whether it's right or not. Because the Bohm's interpretation of quantum mechanics, where the holographic model comes from, is a perfectly nice model. It fits all the data, and it might be right, but unless there's a way to say, this theory would predict something, anything, that we can then test in order to see whether this is a better interpretation than that, then it's basically philosophy. There's nothing wrong with philosophy, except that as an empiricist, I really would like to know which interpretation is right. We have a problem with language, basically. Our language is built on some sequential structure and certain concepts, and we don't have good ways of describing what is probably going on, because it's so far away from common sense that there are no words to describe it. So words like multiple universes or parallel universes and that sort of thing sort of sounds good, but if you asked 100 people, what do you think that actually means, you'd probably get 100 different answers. And so it's not, I have my own prejudices of what I would like to be true. I feel more comfortable with many universes which have different probabilities associated with them, because it gives us much more room to move in terms of free will and in terms of how things can occur, rather than a single world line that we're sort of stuck on, in which case there's no room to move, and everything is sort of set out in front of you and you don't get any choice in the matter. So that's my prejudice, but as to what is actually going on, I don't know.
Multiple possibilities exist in creation. The universes that emerge from the unified field may be endlessly diverse. Can consciousness travel from universe to universe? I don't know. But it is true that consciousness can travel to the very source of our own universe, which is the self-same source of every universe, become intimately familiar with the unified field of natural law at the basis of mind and matter. And by becoming intimately familiar with the unified field at the basis of ours and every universe, we can at least become intimately familiar with the laws. We can begin to appreciate the limitless possibilities of life and even of universes that could emerge. This realization will change human behavior. According to the latest theories of our universe and what underlies it, that is supergravity and superstring theories, and the latest theory called M theory that unites them all, we're living in an 11-dimensional universe, 1 dimension of time, 10 dimensions of space. Somehow the extra dimensions, the 7 extra spatial dimensions, get super compactified. They get spindled up into such tiny tubes, such infinitesimal radiuses, that we don't see them. Effectively, the extra dimensions disappear, leaving us at the macroscopic sensory level the appearance of 3 + 1 dimensions of space.
We are also, this transcendent potentia is very much like a hyperspace. It's beyond ordinary space-time. On the other hand, it's not a dimension of space. It's really without space. So it's not hyperspace in that sense. When it's a hyperspace, we still mean a dimension of beyond the 3 other dimensions of space. But this transcendent potentia, there is no space and there is no time. In quantum measurement theory, space and time are created also with the event of collapse. Before collapse, there is only possibility of space and time. So hyperspace would not be, philosophically it's always similar concept, but not quite the right concept in a mathematical way of speaking to describe transcendent potential. I think that certainly quantum physics has produced such wonderful breakup of the materialist dogma, the deterministic, behaviorist, localist dogma. And non-locality is now become an experimental fact in various parapsychology experiments, and also in our experiences of healing, in our psychological experience of love, which now can be studied in the laboratory to some extent. So this is very, very good progress, and we are making the progress so rapidly that we can really call it a paradigm shift, a kind of coming of a new age. It's happening so quickly, so rapidly, so almost as a miracle, overnight miracle, like the breaking up of the Berlin Wall. Of course, it's not that fast. The major component of it still is by the patient, slow workings of many individual scientists. But still, I think that there is a component of a new age coming, sort of thing, which I like.
I don't spend all my time thinking about the physics of it. What I do is spend a lot more time thinking about the fact that there are now many proposals from physicists who are some mainstream, some are not mainstream, but the point is that there are lots of new proposals coming out which are trying to reconcile our interpretation of quantum mechanics. And so it's not too surprising that you'll find people who will come from slightly different perspectives and create a new model from it. So what I'm paying attention to, and what we're doing at our own institute in terms of this kind of research, is looking for something which is underneath quantum mechanics, with the expectation that whatever that is will probably unify gravity or relativity theory and quantum mechanics, like string theory is trying to do. So lots of us are now working in the same general direction. I don't think it's going to be obvious in the short term how we know who's right. So the approach that we're taking, I mean, because you can come up with a model which may or may not be correct, which sounds good, probably fits the data, but the only way to check to see if that is the right model or even the right interpretation is to do an experiment. The psi phenomena do suggest that there is some kind of interconnection among all things, because otherwise the information wouldn't flow in the way that we see it flow. But what that says about the ontology underneath it, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we can say grand statements like, there is an interconnectedness among all things, and that may be exactly true, but from a scientific perspective, you want to know what does that mean? Is it like an ecological web? Because in an ecological web, all things are connected. I mean, it's the whole point of ecology, is that it all interlocks, and no, it's not like that. Because while it might have some surface similarities to it, we're talking about interconnections that go beyond space and time. And we have something which is so deeply interconnected that it's interconnected through space, sort of imagined, but through time. Something connected through time, richly and deeply interconnected. Then you're dealing with something which has such a rich medium that it's difficult to imagine how anything could come out of it, which is not just a homogeneous mush, you see? If you have, like, you take an example of a really deeply interconnected structure of some type, and I can imagine things like a bowl of Jell-O. You can wiggle it, and the whole thing is kind of wiggling together, and it's very deeply interconnected because it's all like the same gel. And if you scale that out to the size of the universe, we wouldn't see much structure in anything. So where does the structure come from? Does that mean that there are areas that are not quite so interconnected? Because if it was fully interconnected, there wouldn't be any structure anywhere. The whole thing would just mush together. So yes, there's something like interconnections. It is not clear to me that it's interconnected completely homogeneously, because as I said, then we wouldn't see where structure would come about. Because of work in dynamical systems theory and self-organizing structures, it's very likely that there are some spontaneous forms of organization that would occur anyway, even out of a homogeneous mush. But if that homogeneous mush doesn't start with some areas that are slightly different than others, then it would never form anything. So the reason I'm vacillating here is because I don't have a good answer to it, other than, yes, interconnection is important, but how it hangs together, I don't know.
I'm very pragmatic in my approach to science. You know, to me, science is grounded in data, what you can actually observe, either with physical instruments or with your own mind, if we're talking about interior data. And the theories we construct on top of that, they're great. They're an essential part of it because we love to explain things and think we understand it. But when you get way lost in the theories about the theories about the theories and are 1,000 miles from the data, well, you're doing philosophy.
One of the things I've realized is that we've been so culturally conditioned. Here I thought we were in an age of enlightenment and that we would have, through the academic system, the ability to do important research at the frontiers of science, and that science would progress more and more to a very coherent model for what reality is. And in fact, what's happening is now the walls are falling down, and that the house of physics is in need for big house cleaning. The physicists themselves realize this. They have a fear of all of their, many of their beliefs falling apart, because when you bring in consciousness into physics, the physicists are very disturbed. It means that there's no normal causality. Now, what was an example of this? I talked about an experiment I did once when I was in graduate school, and it was to observe a predicted effect that would reveal the presence of ice crystals in the Venus clouds. And I did the work at a telescope, and the idea was to see whether or not my model was borne out in the light curves and the polarization and so forth of planet Venus. And I found the effect. And so I went kind of eureka. I published the results, but I was cautious. I said, this awaits replication. Well, what I think really happened was that I, through my consciousness, influenced the electronics to create the effect that I wanted. And I think that now there are more and more experiments that are beginning to reveal that. And that's very disturbing to many physicists. There was one physicist at Princeton, I'll never forget this, because I was on the faculty there, and there were 40 of us, and it was all male, and 6 of us were Nobel laureates, and one of the Nobel laureates, Philip Anderson, basically said about Robert John's work at Princeton in using random event generators to respond to the intention of operators, in other words, psychokinesis, that if this is true, if we can influence the electronics of a device that's measuring what we're trying to measure as objective reality, then the laws of physics are going to have to be suspended. But then Anderson went on to say that the laws of physics can't be suspended, therefore John must be wrong. Well, now I've gotten to the point where there are just too many anomalies. So what's in fact happening is that this notion of a precise objective science, where you have the objective observer and the observed, and the interaction is simply measuring this reality in the Newtonian sense, that's no longer true. That's bad news for mainstream materialistic science. It's good news for the science of consciousness, because I'm sure we'll figure out ways about how this dance of interaction occurs, how human intention, for example, can actually create results in the material world and act back on the humans. We can find that out because we can observe physical space and then therefore reveal the properties of this unseen, unmanifest reality, this ether, this implicate order that lies underneath what we observe.
I think that certainly quantum physics has produced such wonderful breakup of the materialist dogma, the deterministic, behaviorist, localist dogma. And non-locality is now become an experimental fact in various parapsychology experiments, and also in our experiences of healing, in our psychological experience of love, which now can be studied in the laboratory to some extent. So this is very, very good progress, and we are making the progress so rapidly that we can really call it a paradigm shift, a kind of coming of a new age. It's happening so quickly, so rapidly, so almost as a miracle, overnight miracle, like the breaking up of the Berlin Wall. Of course, it's not that fast. The major component of it still is by the patient, slow workings of many individual scientists. But still, I think that there is a component of a new age coming.
There's no question that we create our own realities. We interpret the input from our senses, which are all just different vibratory information, and we construct our realities. And there's a tremendous amount of freedom involved with the realities that we construct for ourselves. Probably the most enlightened reality that we can construct, the one that's most consistent with scientific fact, is a reality based upon the fundamental unity of everyone and everything. Unified quantum field theories point strongly to the scientific truth that we are all one. Unfortunately, our senses bring us knowledge and experience of differences alone. So in a sense, we have to transcend our senses, in a sense, and found a new worldview based upon the most profound scientific knowledge of the universe. And once we do, once we recognize our fundamental unity, we will never act again towards others in a way that damages others or our social environment or our physical environment. That sort of destructive behavior that fails to recognize the fundamental unity of each of us and of life is simply scientifically erroneous behavior. And hopefully it will be a thing of the past.
Psi phenomena do suggest that there is some kind of interconnection among all things, because otherwise the information wouldn't flow in the way that we see it flow. But what that says about the ontology underneath it, I'm not entirely sure. I mean, we can say grand statements like, there is an interconnectedness among all things, and that may be exactly true, but from a scientific perspective, you want to know what does that mean? You know, is it like an ecological web? Because in an ecological web, all things are connected. I mean, it's the whole point of ecology, is that it all interlocks, and no, it's not like that. Because while it might have some surface similarities to it, we're talking about interconnections that go beyond space and time. And we have something which is so deeply interconnected that it's interconnected through space, sort of imagine, but through time. Something connected through time, richly and deeply interconnected. Then you're dealing with something which has such a rich medium that it's difficult to imagine how anything could come out of it, which is not just a homogeneous mush. You see? If you have, like, you take an example of a really deeply interconnected structure of some type, and I can imagine things like a bowl of Jell-O. You can wiggle it, and the whole thing is kind of wiggling together, and it's very deeply interconnected because it's all like the same gel. And if you scale that out to the size of the universe, we wouldn't see much structure in anything. So where does the structure come from? Does that mean that there are areas that are not quite so interconnected? Because if it was fully interconnected, there wouldn't be any structure anywhere. The whole thing would just mush together. So yes, there's something like interconnections. It is not clear to me that it's interconnected completely homogeneously, because as I said, then we wouldn't see where structure would come about. Because of work in dynamical systems theory and self-organizing structures, it's very likely that there's some spontaneous forms of organization that would occur anyway, even out of a homogeneous mush. But if that homogeneous mush doesn't start with some areas that are slightly different than others, then they would never form anything. So The reason I'm vacillating here is because I don't have a good answer to it, other than, yes, the interconnection is important, but how it hangs together, I don't know.
What we find is that more and more experiments are being done to verify the fact that we live in a non-local universe. The investigation of non-local connections is now the hottest, the most interesting arena in modern physics and straight physics at Princeton, MIT, Geneva. The most interesting things that people are looking at right now is the way that distant twins are connected to one another. What they're looking at is twin photons. I'm interested in twin people who are separated at birth, but after years of growing up, wind up with the same appearance and the same profession, frequently a wife of the same name and a house of the same appearance. It's as though the twins remain connected across time and space, just the way same way the particles remain connected across time and space. And both in the parapsychological arena and in the physics arena, what's clear is that we reside in a non-local quantum interconnected universe, and this connection, as it becomes more and more accepted, is going to change the way we look at ourselves and the way we look at the physical universe.
The illusion, you know, whether it's a programmed illusion of a computer or if it's a programmed illusion in consciousness, both negate what the world is about. So this negation I don't like. There is also an affirmative view of the world that we can take, which is that the illusion is the only way that the subject-object split can be created. In that sense, it is an illusion, because without the illusion, there is only consciousness and its possibilities. There is no subject-object split, there is no experience, and therefore, there is only possibilities. Everything that can happen, well, is potential, but nothing actually is happening. From that, we make the world where things are happening, and all happenings are illusory in that sense. I like the word epiphenomenon better. All happenings are epiphenomenon of reality, which is where there is no split and nothing happens. That's reality. Agreed, that's eternal, and only the eternal can be called reality. Reality got to be eternal. This idea is very good, coming from all the spiritual traditions. But then, what is the transitory as it is world? What does it mean? There's a tendency in Buddhism, there's a tendency in all religious traditions, spiritual traditions, and there's a tendency also on the part of the new scientists who glorify computers and deterministic aspects to negate the world. To say that the world is determined is to negate the world to the utmost, because the world does not have any creativity. It's all just things that will happen anyway. That's all programmed, that is all determined by the laws. We undermine consciousness, we undermine ourselves when we do that, because that is not the way we behave. If we were completely conditioned beings, we would have no interest in living. We all commit mass suicide, because it's a living that is completely devoid of anything that we call living. But behaviors don't think like that. They don't realize that would be the case. And spiritual traditions also don't realize that if that were the spiritual search, to look for a non-illusory but nothing happens kind of condition, then why is all this? Why is consciousness building the world this way? Why is God creating a world in which all these things happen? So this world cannot be negated, should not be negated. Instead, one should take a positive view of the world, that this is the only way consciousness can experience itself. G. Spencer Brown, a very good mathematician, put it very well, that the only way that a consciousness can experience itself is to split itself up into two parts, one part of which is subject and the other part of which is object. There's no other way of doing it. And it's illusory, like Escher's drawing hands creating each other, left hand drawing the right, right hand drawing the left. Its illusoriness is undoubtedly true, but illusoriness also is the objective. The play is the thing, illusory as it is. And then you see that, the play is actually evolving. It's not a static play. It's not a determined play. It's the evolving creative play. And then you are catching on to the subtleties of consciousness. So consciousness looks at itself again and again, and all its possibilities, and the play goes on and on, because consciousness is infinite. The number of possibilities ultimately is infinite. There's an infinite way that consciousness can create this illusory play in an evolving way and better way, and that is the way I like to look at the entire. There are many thinkers who are now looking at the world this way. It's a very wonderful way of looking at it. When quantum physics is explicating some of the representation making that is part of this evolution. It's a progression of the of how much better we can make representations of the mental, of the vital, of the archetypal theme world of Plato into the physical, and this is what the evolution is about. It's getting to a very important phase, which Aurobindo calls supramental, making representations beyond the representations of the mind that brain can make. Can we make this change in matter? Can we evolve matter further? Can we evolve brain further? Can we evolve representation making even further than we already have? This is the question that human beings should ask. This is where human evolution got to go. So we have work to do here. If we stay too much with that world negation idea, it will just hinder our fun in terms of the play of consciousness. Not that that will be outside of consciousness, that is still okay, but I think that we can have more fun, more involvement, more joy and delight of creativity if we accepted a more world-affirming view.
Well, I think we have to take consciousness as a primary reality and not just assume that someday they'll explain it away in terms of brain function. Now, whatever consciousness is, it manifests through the brain. Okay, so clearly the brain's involved, and I find it exciting as people learn more and more about the brain. But basically I'm a pragmatic dualist myself. I'm convinced that consciousness has qualities that will never be reduced to material things, but they manifest through it. The analogy I like to use is that when I think of consciousness, it's like a combination of a car and a driver. A car and a driver together can do all sorts of amazing things, go fast, turn, stop, and so forth. But the driver is not the car. It's possible for the driver to get out of the car at some point, and then we're talking about studying consciousness when it's not manifesting through a physical body. And that gets really interesting. We're just in our infancy on looking at that. But that's an essential part of the equation that has to be looked at if we really want to understand the mind. I'm glad to learn about the brain, right? I like to know what kind of car I'm driving, as it were, and what its performance characteristics are, and how I can use it, and how I have to maintain it, and all that kind of thing. But that's only part of the story. As an example of that, people have emotional disturbances, say they're too excitable, so they're given some kind of drug that inhibits brain response, and now they're not too excitable. Their emotions go over a much smaller range and they get along better. That'll be like controlling somebody who drove too recklessly by flattening the tires on their car. They could only drive along at a few miles an hour now, and it is indeed much safer, but they're crippled. You didn't really get at the fundamental reason for it. If we just try to understand consciousness by going at its brain manifestations, we'll get some useful stuff, but we'll miss the boat in important ways.
Consciousness creates knowledge. Consciousness is pure wakefulness. But wakefulness on its own is an uncomfortable existence. Consciousness therefore becomes aware of something. It becomes aware of itself. In the process of consciousness awakening to its own existence, consciousness in essence becomes the knower and the known, and the process of knowing. And hence, Trinity is created from unity. In this very same way, you can actually trace the emergence of nature's laws. The emergence of the universe as a whole as nothing other than the self-expression of an underlying field of consciousness, an underlying unified field of all the laws of nature, now being identified by science. So the whole of creation is in fact a dance. And we're co-creative in that creation process. Every time we think, every time we create, every time we act, it is an act of self-creation, of self-definition. So practically speaking, that means we should seek to be, at every moment, the grandest version of the greatest vision we've ever held about ourselves. Because every act, every instant is an act of self-identification, of self-definition. And we are powerful creatures. We should always act in the highest possible way at every moment. In that way, life evolves most quickly towards its ultimate goal. An ultimate goal of life is complete and utter satisfaction. Infinity, if it could be lived in life, would be the natural goal of life. And it can be lived. In fact, it is the birthright of the magnificent human brain physiology to appreciate nature's unity, to appreciate nature's infinity, which is our own infinity, our own subjective unboundedness, and to live it practically in daily life.